we fight for that itch.
Rarely do I see any American Italians eating in here.
But I'm funny how? I mean, funny like I'm a clown, I amuse you?
Villkoret är att jag får leva.
Yes! Yes! Yes!
Welcome to Real Genius. I am Chris Vognar, culture critic of the Dallas Morning News.
And I'm Robert Wilonsky, the most depressed man at the Dallas Morning News.
No, that might be me because we both just watched Kurt Cobain, Montage of Heck, premiered Monday on HBO. It will now screen in perpetuity on HBO. It's a very well-made film about Nirvana's late frontman, and man, is it depressing. It is like just sad, black hole depressing.
Yeah, it's weird. I don't think as much as I know about the Kurt Cobain story, it still managed to floor me.
Yeah.
I never should have watched it having had that much to drink at that late of an hour.
This is like turning into a motif with our show, by the way.
Yeah, now that you're sober, I guess I'm making up for both of us. And while doing it in the middle of a Kurt Cobain documentary,
that might have
it was hard.
Might not have been a bad time to do it, actually.
It was pretty hard. It was pretty hard to watch in a lot of ways, which we'll get to in a second. But before we do that, if you haven't seen it, if you haven't seen it, it just means A, you don't have HBO, or B, you don't like Nirvana. And if you don't like Nirvana, you still should watch it anyway, because I do believe that it is one of the greatest biographies ever made about a musician, living or otherwise. So let's take a look at a few seconds of Brett Morgen's Kurt Cobain Montage of Heck, currently airing on HBO. Well, the weird thing is, those are obviously suggested possible names for what became Nirvana, but that's also, a lot of those were the original names of the Dallas Morning News, or at least the original thought-for names of the Morning News.
Fecal matter?
Just getting ahead of the joke.
So we get a taste there. I think one of the things that makes this film special is the way that Brett Morgen, the filmmaker, brings things like text and illustrations to life through animation. I've never seen a documentary that can make somebody's handwriting so active and so vital, and it's really sort of a portal. Kurt Cobain was a compulsive scribbler and doodler.
I have the journals.
So, I think he makes use of those journals very, very well. What makes the movie hard, and again, I think we both liked it a lot, it's so visceral and unfiltered. There's no distance. It's all recordings of Cobain talking and interviews with those close to him, including Courtney Love. There is
home movies,
a lot of home movies, and
narrating.
Some really, really kind of disturbing home movies. You mentioned off camera a minute ago. Then they're giving Frances Bean as a young baby a haircut while probably high on heroin.
Well, not probably. I mean, that was the one scene. If I have been reading interviews with Brett Morgen, that's the one scene that nobody in the family, Kurt's sister, mother, Courtney, did not want in the film.
Yeah,
because it's the scene in which Kurt is giving baby Frances Bean a haircut while trying not to nod off, while the fact he's incredibly stoned.
But it's representative of the dysfunction in those scenes is so raw and so impactful, and it's even more painful because you can see these two people really did love each other.
It's not Sid and Nancy like.
No, it's. I mean, that popped into my head once or twice, but no, it's not Sid and Nancy like.
All right, so there's a couple things I really want to talk about, because they're the things that I went back and watched a couple of times. And for me, I think the best part of the film is the early scenes in which you see little cute Kurt. I mean, he was adorable as a child.
And they're playing little music box segments of Nirvana songs.
They're playing All Apologies in music box while and I think it's, as the father of an 11-year-old who very much remembers those Harry's little boy days are not far behind. And you keep thinking about God, man, no one ever thinks that 4-year-old, that 8-year-old, that 11-year-old is going to grow up to be a tortured genius who eventually kills himself, because that's just an adorable, beautiful little child. But certainly we all know, if you followed anything about Cobain's story over the years, you knew that his parents' divorce, being shuffled around from house to house, grandparent to parent to grandparent, and so on and so forth, really screwed him up. Had a lot of anger that punk rock rescued him from or gave him an outlet for. But you take away all that sort of accumulated knowledge of 20 years and just look at those home movies of that little kid, and it's just heartbreaking.
That is heartbreaking.
And it's a cautionary tale, because you're thinking, man, I don't want to screw up my kid the way that, you know, that Kurt Cobain's parents and grandparents clearly messed with him.
Yeah.
And it's just, it wrecked me.
His mom is very, very candid. His sister is very candid. Courtney Love is very candid. I admired her candor in addressing some really ugly stuff. And you know, what struck me was, even if we didn't know Kurt Cobain's fate, that he would commit suicide at the age of 27, this would be a really sad story.
Yeah.
And then you just add what we know onto that, and the real tragedy, the end of it, that just kind of puts the stake in the heart. But it's also at the same time a really vital look at their music, and the live performance footage is fantastic, especially the earlier stuff. And it's a look, as you just alluded to, about how art, in this case, you know, punk rock and hard rock, can at least help you cope on some extent. It can give you an outlet.
It's a pressure valve.
Yes, and this is also maybe the greatest. I mean, you don't need to watch any Partnership for Drug-Free America videos after watching this and seeing what heroin does to human beings.
They should have just called it Scared Straight. I mean, it's something. I mean, it just made me so. I mean, it's been 24 hours since I've seen it or something, and it's just so. It stuck with me in a really weird.
I'm glad it messed you up too, because it messed me up. It put me in a dark hole of a mood.
The animated scene, the sequence early on where he's talking about an incident in 1988. There's audio recordings of just Kurt talking about this sequence about a bunch of guys who used to go to this girl's house when they were younger, and what they would do, and why they were there, and what eventually happens. And it's just, I mean, it wasn't, when he killed himself, it wasn't the first time he tried to kill himself. We all know it wasn't the first time he almost died, but we find out that Kurt Cobain actually considered suicide because of something that happened that I don't want to give away. But it's just, most rock biographies, most behind the musics, do tend to tell the same story over and over. And it's, in a lot of ways, this isn't that different. Tortured childhood, messed up family, leads to genius, leads to success that the guy wants and yet doesn't want. And Kurt, make no mistake, Kurt Cobain wanted to be famous.
Sure. Although, yeah, he wanted it, and he was repulsed by it, and he hated himself.
Right, but he wanted to be famous. Yeah, he hated himself for wanting to be famous, and he hated the fame when it came. But this rips the guts out of that conventional, cliched format. I mean, this is the ultimate behind the music. This is inside the music. It is the most visceral documentation of a musician's life, and in some ways death, even though we don't see it or it's never addressed. And thank God it's not.
In form, it's just so radically different from other kinds of music docs, especially the behind the music kind of story. There's so much abstract imagery and sound that Morgan is using here. And of course, it doesn't have the redemptive ending that those kinds of docs.
I like the way it ends.
Tend to like so much.
That.
Yeah, I do too. It's very sudden, but very effective. Talk about Brett Morgan for a second. Really, he toiled over this for years, in wrangling with Courtney Love and
getting all the footage,
getting the footage,
everything out of the vault.
He had to stop for a few years. He's a really interesting documentary filmmaker. He made some films with his ex.
Kid Stays in the Picture.
Nanette Brewstein. They did that together. They did a great boxing documentary called On the Ropes, which was his first film, I believe. So I've always admired. He did the Rolling Stones doc for HBO, Crossfire Hurricane, as well. He's got a real purity of vision that I really admire.
And collaborated a great deal with Frances Bean. I mean, she eventually ended up taking over with him and doing.
She's one of the producers on the film,
right?
Yeah.
So she ended up taking it with him because it stalled. He and Courtney kind of had a falling out, and she let him make the film he wanted to make. In fact, it's been my understanding while reading interviews with her and with him that she actually pushed him to make it even a bit more brutally honest and a bit darker and more difficult than maybe he even imagined it initially, because she wanted people to see her father the way she vaguely and barely remembered him, because she doesn't really know him. This is the way she knows her dad, and now it's the way we know him, and it's hard. I mean, I can't imagine.
I suppose if you're going to make a brutally honest documentary about Kurt Cobain, it has to be very painful.
Yeah, certainly just to watch it.
I mean, it's a must for Nirvana fans.
It's a must for any
it's
film.
It's essential,
Yeah.
but certainly for Nirvana fans.
But for any fan of filmmaking and for storytelling, I mean, to me, this is one of the great modern-day documentaries. I mean, to me, capturing the Friedmans and this and a few other things in recent years, Hoop Dreams, and I'm not going all the way back to Primary and the Drew and Maisel stuff, but I mean, this is
Nanook of the North, don't forget that.
This is one of the great modern-day documentaries. To me, this right there with Capturing the Friedmans, which is made up of a lot of home movies as well.
Which was made by Jarecki, who just did the Durst story
So
on
to me,
HBO.
these two films in some ways kind of go hand in hand. They're difficult films because they are eyewitness accounts of the worst and the best and the worst that we're capable of.
So we both say, check out Kurt Cobain, Montage of Heck. Be prepared for a haymaker.
Yeah, thank God you can watch it at home, curled up in the fetal position as I did. That's the good thing about HBO.
Good times. Next week we'll get all actiony and talk about Mad Max.
Maddest Max. The Matter Max.
The maddest Max of all Maxes. And we'll see you then.